Why did a frail primate, lacking sharp claws or a thick hide, manage to wipe out megafauna and fly to the moon? The answer lies not in muscle, but in the ability to believe in things that are utterly unreal. Approximately 70,000 years ago, an invisible yet earth-shattering event took place within the neural architecture of Homo sapiens, an event historians call the cognitive revolution, marking the permanent divergence between us and the rest of the animal kingdom. We must confront the humbling truth that prior to that fateful moment, Sapiens was fundamentally an unremarkable animal living obscurely in a corner of Africa. Our impact on the global ecosystem at that time was negligible compared to that of jellyfish, woodpeckers, or fireflies. But then, a random mutation in our neural wiring changed everything. The essence of this revolution was not a sudden increase in brain size or muscle mass, but the emergence of symbolic thinking. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists have unearthed pieces of red ochre engraved with cross-hatched geometric patterns dating back 75,000 years. Evidence that humans had begun storing information outside the body and contemplating abstract concepts. It was akin to installing new software on old hardware, unlocking capabilities unprecedented in biological history. The critical difference lay in language. Before this timeline, a monkey could cry out, "Careful, a lion," to warn its troop of an immediate physical danger. But after the cognitive revolution, Homo sapiens could say, "The lion spirit is the guardian ancestor of our tribe." The shift from a language that describes reality to a language that constructs reality was the key for sapiens to escape the ordinary food chain. Thanks to the ability to tell and collectively believe in these fictional stories, we broke through the biological ceiling known as Dunbar's number. According to Professor Robin Dunbar, the human brain is only capable of maintaining stable social relationships within a group of about 150 individuals. Beyond this number, order collapses. However, through shared belief in gods, myths, or later, nations and currency, sapiens could cooperate flexibly with millions of strangers. It was this very ability that allowed us to overwhelm our Neanderthal cousins, who were physically stronger but socially inferior, pushing them into the shadows of extinction approximately 40,000 years ago. Today, when you hold a banknote, you are not looking at a piece of inanimate paper, but at a conventional value. That is the direct legacy of the cognitive revolution. We live in a web of pervasive myths, from laws and human rights to corporate entities. But do we, the architects of this virtual reality, truly master the stories we create? Or are the stories themselves leading the destiny of humanity in a direction no one can predict? If we look back at the history of this planet, not through the lens of centuries, but through millennia, a terrifying silence descends upon the greatest question of human existence. Why are we the only survivors? We often assume that Homo sapiens, modern humans, dominating the planet is a given, a destiny ordained by superior intelligence. But the truth is, for most of our time on Earth, humanity was not alone. We shared this atmosphere, drank from the same rivers, and hunted on the same plains with at least 6 other human species. Among them, our closest, strongest, and most mysterious brother was the Neanderthal. And this is where we encounter a great paradox, a truth that might shake the pride of anyone who believes our ancestors won thanks to bigger brains. Let the numbers and archaeological data tell you a different story. One of the most common misconceptions fed by misleading illustrations in old textbooks is the image of Neanderthals as hunched, dim-witted brutes. The reality is quite the opposite. Fossil skulls found across Europe and West Asia show that the average brain volume of Neanderthals was actually larger than that of modern Homo sapiens. While our brains hover around 1,350 cubic centimeters, Neanderthals frequently possessed brains of 1,500 cubic centimeters or more. They were not just big-brained, they were physical giants in the literal sense of survival. Their bones were thicker and denser, their chests barrel-shaped to house large lungs for breathing the thin air of high altitudes. And their muscle structure was developed to such an extent that muscle attachment points on fossil bones suggest terrifying strength. They were biological machines perfectly tempered for the freezing ice age of Europe. If you put a Homo sapiens, our direct ancestor, and a Neanderthal in a ring for a one-on-one duel, the result would be unsurprising. Sapiens would lose miserably. With superior muscle power and an incredible threshold for pain, a Neanderthal could easily snap the neck of a sapiens before we could launch any counterattack. They were apex hunters, the supreme rulers of the European food chain for hundreds of thousands of years before we arrived. So, why did those who were stronger, had bigger brains, and were better adapted vanish into nothingness, while the frail, slender primates from Africa came to dominate the world? The answer lies not in the individual, but in the collective. It lies not in the strength of muscles, but in the strength of fictional stories. If a one-on-one duel belongs to the Neanderthal, then in a conflict between 100 sapiens and 100 Neanderthals, sapiens will always emerge victorious. This is the crux of the cognitive revolution. The vital difference lies in social organization. Archaeology indicates that Neanderthals lived in small, isolated groups, rarely exceeding a few dozen individuals. They were extreme locals, tightly bound to territory and family, but rarely linking with strangers. Their social networks were limited by direct intimacy. They only trusted those they could see and touch. In contrast, Homo sapiens unlocked a secret weapon, complex language capable of transmitting information about things that do not exist. We could not only report there is a lion by the river, but could also say the lion is the guardian spirit of our tribe. This ability to create abstract concepts and shared beliefs, collective fictions, allowed sapiens to cooperate flexibly with countless strangers. While a group of Neanderthals struggled to defend their cave in isolation, sapiens could exchange tactical information, plan ambushes, and mobilize forces from different tribes tens of kilometers away. We could gather hundreds, even thousands of people who did not know each other to fight under the name of a totem, a god, or a common belief. The extinction of the Neanderthals was not a random event. Professor Tom Higham of the University of Oxford, in a groundbreaking study published in Nature in 2014, used the most advanced radiocarbon dating techniques to redraw this map of extinction. The results revealed a chilling coincidence. Neanderthals vanished from Europe about 40,000 years ago, almost immediately after the wave of Homo sapiens swept into their territory. The overlap between the two species lasted only a few thousand years, a blink of an eye in geological history. This data suggests a violent replacement or a brutal competition for resources where the one who knew how to tell stories defeated the one who only knew how to hunt prey. Visualize that clash. The Neanderthals, though brave and intelligent, faced an enemy they could not comprehend. They saw weaker groups infiltrating their territory, yet those weaklings moved like a fluid stream, constantly replenished with reinforcements, knowing how to trade weapons and food across trade networks spanning hundreds of miles. Something archaeological evidence shows Neanderthals completely lacked. Sapiens could plan for winter during the summer, could ally to encircle prey, and most importantly, could transmit those experiences across generations with precision thanks to flexible language. The failure of the Neanderthals was the price paid for isolation. They possessed large brains to process information about their immediate environment, to craft exquisite stone tools, but they lacked the social software to connect those brains together into a collective supercomputer. Sapiens, conversely, turned each individual brain into a node in a vast intellectual network. Our victory was a victory of large-scale cooperation. It was the ability to believe in things that are not real, believing in laws, believing in gods, believing in the value of cowrie shells or later currency, that allowed us to transcend the biological limit of Dunbar's number, the figure capping social relationships at 150 people, to build empires, nations, and global civilizations. Looking back 40,000 years, the disappearance of the Neanderthals leaves a profound lesson for modern humans. We do not rule the world because we are the most perfect individuals. If stripped of the cloak of civilization and thrown into the jungle alone, we are far weaker than our extinct brethren. We rule because we know how to weave webs of meaning, turning separate individuals into a unified entity. But this story is not over. It leads us to an obvious yet disturbing truth about the modern world. Today, we still operate on that ancient mechanism. Multinational corporations, global financial markets, or the internet, all are upgraded versions of the cooperative capacity our ancestors used to defeat the Neanderthals. we remain physically frail creatures, but supremely dangerous thanks to our ability to believe in shared stories. However, standing before archaeological sites where Neanderthal bones lie cold in the earth, we are forced to ask ourselves, is there a limit to this cooperative power based on fictions? When we create systems too complex, stories too vast for the storytellers themselves to control, are we stepping into the footsteps of extinction in a different way? Neanderthals died because they could not connect. Could Sapiens collapse because we connect too much to the illusions we created, to the point of forgetting the biological reality that sustains us? That is the question history leaves open, waiting for us to write the next chapter. If fossilized bones tell us the story of muscle and diet, what tells us the story of ancient dreams? How can scientists trace the exact moment when a spark of cognition flashed within our ancestors' skulls, transforming an animal that merely reacted to reality into a being capable of reconstructing it? The answer to this grand mystery lies not in sharp stone tools used for butchery, but in seemingly meaningless scratches on a small stone, lying silent in the darkness for tens of millennia. Let us travel back in time to the southern coast of South Africa, entering Blombos Cave overlooking the Indian Ocean. Here, in 2002, a sensational discovery was published in the journal Science by Professor Christopher Henshelwood and his colleagues, shaking the entire field of archaeology and forcing us to rewrite the history of human thought. They found 2 blocks of ochre, a red iron-rich mineral, dating back 75,000 years. Later studies pushed the timeline back even further. But what made the scientific community hold its breath was not their age, but what was engraved upon them. On the smoothed surface of the red clay was a network of cross-hatched lines forming diamonds, carved meticulously and with clear intent. This was a genuine shock. Why would a prehistoric hunter living in a world teeming with predators and severe survival concerns spend hours carving geometric lines that offered no help in killing an antelope or gathering fruit? The answer is the key unlocking the door to the cognitive revolution. It was symbolic thought. The engravings at Blombos are the first undeniable physical evidence that Homo sapiens knew how to store information outside the brain. If the brain is biological hardware, then that block of ochre was humanity's first portable hard drive. Those lines did not simulate anything found in nature, not trees, not animals, but were a code, a communication signal, or a symbol of identity that only members of the same social group could decode. This was a quantum leap from draw what you see to draw what you think. But the story of the rise of the mind did not stop in Africa. As the migratory tide of sapiens spread across the globe, they carried this flame of imagination and ignited it upon cave walls from Europe to Asia. For a long time, Western academia believed Europe was the sole cradle of cave art. But a landmark study published in Nature in 2014 by Maxime Aubert from Griffith University shattered this prejudice. On the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia, the research team used uranium-thorium dating to prove that paintings of wild pigs and hand stencils there were at least 40,000 years old, equal to or even older than the famous paintings in Europe. Imagine the moment our ancestors, at opposite ends of the world, separated by tens of thousands of miles, performed an identical, extraordinary act. They placed their hands on the cold rock face, blew red pigment over them, leaving behind an eternal negative imprint. I was here. That is not just art, that is self-awareness. At Chauvet Cave in France, paintings dating back 36,000 years demonstrate an astonishing level of abstract thinking. Herds of horses, lions, and rhinos do not stand still. They are drawn overlapping each other, creating a motion effect under flickering torchlight, much like humanity's first cinematic reels. The prehistoric artist was not merely copying nature. They were storytelling, utilizing memory and emotion to recreate the world according to their will. However, the pinnacle of symbolic thought and the clearest evidence for the ability to construct shared fictions lies not in real animals, but in creatures that never existed. Deep within the Hohenstein-Stadel cave in Germany, archaeologists found fragments of mammoth ivory dating back about 40,000 years. When assembled, they faced a spine-chilling entity, the Lowenmensch figurine, also known as the Lion Man, a creature standing upright on human legs, yet bearing the head of a majestic cave lion. This is irrefutable proof, a monumental milestone in cognitive evolution. Why is this small statue so important? Because in the physical world, there are no lion-human hybrids. To create this work, the Sapiens artist had to perform an extremely complex intellectual operation. Detach the characteristics of human and lion from reality, hold them in working memory, then mold and combine them in the imagination to create an entirely new entity. This is the core capacity that helped humanity transcend the Dunbar lumber. The ability to imagine things that are not real is the foundation of all religions, myths, and later complex social structures like nations or currency. If you can convince the whole tribe to believe in the lion-man spirit, you can link hundreds, thousands of strangers to cooperate under the patronage of that god, something Neanderthals or any other primate could not do. The Lion Man statue is not just a sculpture, it is a manifesto for the birth of the spiritual world and social order based on shared belief. From the crude crosshatches on the ochre block in Blombos Cave to the divine beast hybrid figure in Germany, we clearly see an evolutionary path not of muscle, but of information processing capacity. Sapiens began to live in two parallel worlds: the objective world of rivers, mountains, plants, and beasts, and the subjective world of symbols, gods, and stories. It is this second world, the world of ghosts created by the mind, that contains our true power. The consequences of this leap are still shaping your life at this very moment. When you look at a banknote and see purchasing power instead of just colored paper, when you look at a flag and see a nation instead of a cloth, or when you believe in human rights, justice, and law, things that have no physical form, you are using the exact same neural mechanism that the artists at Blombos and Hohenstein-Stadel activated tens of thousands of years ago. We are not just their biological descendants. We are the heirs to a legacy of boundless imagination. Looking back at the journey from dark caves to the glittering metropolises of today, a paradoxical truth emerges. Humanity's greatest strength is not that we understand reality clearly, but that we are capable of dreaming together of things that never existed. Those ancient scratches were the first lines of code programming human civilization. But if the ability to believe in the invisible lifted us to the top of the food chain, could those very illusions blind us to the existential dangers of the real world? The answer is perhaps still waiting to be carved onto a rock face of the future. Why are we the only species on this planet capable of cooperating flexibly with countless strangers? Let us imagine a simple yet provocative experiment. You place 10,000 chimpanzees into a football stadium or a skyscraper. The result would undoubtedly be a chaotic disaster of screaming, biting, and bloody territorial disputes. But if you put 10,000 complete strangers into that same space, the result could be an orderly concert, a scientific conference, or a bustling trade network. This critical difference lies not in genes nor in muscle power, but in an invisible boundary our ancestors crossed while every other primate was left behind. To understand this leap, we must look at a cold number proposed by anthropologist Robin Dunbar from the University of Oxford. Based on the size of the human neocortex, Dunbar calculated that the natural biological limit for our social relationships stops at 150. This is Dunbar's number. For millions of years, our ancestors lived in small tribes where trust was built on knowing faces, names, and direct daily interaction. Beyond the number 150, social order collapses because the human brain cannot process more information about personal relationships. According to this biological law, humanity should only have existed as small disjointed groups, constantly in conflict. Yet historical reality has proven the opposite. Sapiens built empires of thousands, cities of millions, and global networks. The key to shattering this biological glass ceiling was the birth of a cognitive weapon never before seen on Earth, the ability to create and believe in shared fictions. This is the darkest and most brilliant magic of the cognitive revolution. While vervet monkeys can emit sounds to signal, "Careful, a lion," sapiens developed a language infinitely more flexible. We do not just describe physical reality like rivers, mountains, trees, or beasts. We began to speak of things that do not exist in the material world. We spoke of gods, of ancestral spirits, and, most importantly, of imagined orders. The power of Sapiens lies not in an individual being smarter than a Neanderthal, but in the fact that thousands of strangers can build a pyramid together, or millions can join a crusade simply because they all believe in a common story. You cannot convince a monkey to give you its banana now in exchange for a limitless forest of bananas after death in heaven. Only sapiens can believe in such stories. And it is precisely the ability to believe in those unreal things that creates the power to change the real world. This mechanism explains the birth of abstract concepts that completely dominate our modern lives, such as nations, human rights, or limited liability companies. Take a company such as Peugeot or Google. Ask yourself, where is this company truly located? If all their factories burned down, all employees were dismissed, all vehicles or machines were destroyed, the company would still exist. It can still borrow money from banks, can still be sued in court, and can still buy assets. Why? Because the company is a legal entity, a fictional story that all of us, from lawyers and judges to bankers, agree to treat as real. In the past, tribal shamans used masks and dances to summon guardian spirits. Today, lawyers use documents and seals to summon a legal person. The psychological mechanism is identical. We weave a web of intersubjective meaning together, and that web becomes as hard as rock, shaping the behavior of billions. The perfect and most potent example of this shared fiction mechanism is money. Look at the banknote in your wallet or the numbers on your bank account screen. The paper itself has no nutritional value. You cannot eat it. It has no utility value. You cannot use it to shelter from rain or as a weapon. Physically, it is nearly worthless. Yet it possesses omnipotent power, capable of exchange for food, housing, loyalty, and even life. Why? Because money is the most universal and efficient system of mutual trust ever created. Money works not because the paper has value, but because we believe in the economic story it represents. The farmer sells rice for a paper printed with a leader's image, not because he needs the paper, but because he believes the shoemaker will also accept it. This is the most paradoxical truth of human history. The material turns out to be entirely dependent on the spiritual. Money is the only story everyone believes, regardless of religion, gender, or nationality. Even mortal enemies, people who do not believe in the same God, are still willing to believe in the same dollar or gold bar. The consequence of this capacity for shared fiction is immense and has spanned tens of thousands of years. It allowed sapiens to detach from the slow grip of biological evolution. If other animals need millions of years to change behavior through genetic mutation, sapiens can change social structures in a single generation by changing the story they believe in. In 1789, the French changed the story from the divine right of kings to the power of the people, almost overnight. Their genes did not change, but their reality was completely upended. This ability transformed us into architects of reality, allowing us to build massive collaborative systems transcending geographic borders and bloodlines. But as we stand here, in a modern world operated by invisible lines of code and abstract international treaties, we must recognize a profound truth. We are living in two parallel layers of reality. The objective reality of rivers, trees, storms, things that exist whether we believe in them or not, and the intersubjective reality of gods, nations, currency, laws, things that exist only when we collectively believe. The greatest danger of the 21st century is not the collapse of the physical world, but the fracture of shared stories. When belief in shared fictions is shaken, when people no longer believe in the value of money, in the legitimacy of the state, or in the meaning of human rights, then the entire colossal structure of civilization we have painfully built over 70,000 years could collapse as quickly as a sandcastle before the tide. We went from small tribes fearing the night to wielders of power who split atoms and manipulate genetic codes, all thanks to the ability to tell and believe stories. But in the era of artificial intelligence and virtual reality, when the line between real and virtual blurs, are we inadvertently writing a risky final chapter for our own story? As old fictions gradually lose their binding power, will humanity possess the wisdom to create a new story, inclusive and solid enough to unite 8 billion people in the next chapter of history? Or will we let suspicion push us back to the chaotic era of primitive tribes, now armed with weapons of mass destruction? Try closing your eyes and imagining you are standing in the middle of Times Square in New York, or squeezed into a stadium packed with 80,000 spectators in London. Surrounding you are thousands of complete strangers. You do not know their names, you do not know their personalities, and you certainly do not know if they intend to harm you. Yet, the miracle is that you still feel safe. You trust that order will be maintained. But why? Why can a primate, inherently carrying the wild instincts of vigilance, coexist peacefully in such absurdly huge herds? The answer lies not in innate kindness, but in a ruthless mathematical limit etched into our cortex, and how our ancestors deceived that limit in a spectacular fashion. In the 1990s, anthropologist Robin Dunbar at the University of Oxford published a finding that shook the study of social evolution. By measuring the size of the neocortex in primates and comparing it to their troop size, he found an undeniable ratio. The larger the brain, the larger the social group. But when applying this formula to the human brain size, the number stops at a modest level, 150. This is known as Dunbar's number. According to pure biological law, The brain of Homo sapiens only has enough processing power to maintain stable social relationships with a maximum of about 150 individuals. The mechanism to bind this group of 150 is gossip. In the primitive world, knowing who is sleeping with whom, who is a cheat, who just found honey, was a matter of survival. We needed detailed information about each individual to build trust. But this mechanism has a fatal weakness. It cannot scale. You cannot gossip with 1,000 people. When the number of tribe members exceeds the 100 threshold, the brain is overloaded with data. The trust network based on personal relations snaps, and the inevitable result is division, chaos, and violence, tearing the group apart again. For hundreds of thousands of years, humanity was imprisoned in this invisible glass cage. We lived in small tribes, knowing everyone by name, and viewing anyone outside that circle of 150 as a potential threat. If history had stopped there, humanity today would still be merely scattered groups of hunters in the jungle, with no cities, no nations, and certainly no internet. But the cognitive revolution triggered a software update that changed everything. About 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens managed something no other animal could. We began telling each other stories about things that did not exist in the physical world. We found a way to hack the system error of Dunbar's number. Instead of building trust based on personal acquaintance, I trust you because I saw you share food yesterday, we switched to building trust based on shared myths. This was the most critical leap in the history of human social organization, the birth of shared fictions. Picture two strange, primitive men meeting in a dark cave. By natural instinct, they would draw weapons. But if one paints on his chest the image of a sacred bull, the symbol of a guardian god, and the other also bows before that symbol, a miracle occurs. They lower their weapons. They share food. They cooperate in hunting. They trust each other, not because they know each other, but because they both believe in the story of the bull god. Divinity, in this context, is not just spiritual faith, but a social technology, a kind of invisible cement binding millions of separate bricks into a solid wall. The ability to believe in these imagined entities allowed sapiens to shatter the glass ceiling of 150 people, to create cooperative networks of thousands, then millions. This was the premise for the birth of city-states, kingdoms, and later global empires. Look at historical examples to see the terrifying power of this mechanism. How could an emperor in Rome order a soldier on a distant northern frontier to sacrifice his life? That soldier had never met the emperor, never dined with him. He did not sacrifice himself for the emperor personally. He sacrificed for the image of the Roman eagle, for the concept of empire, things entirely the product of collective imagination. Soldiers in the same legion did not need to be close friends to fight together. They only needed to believe in the story of patriotism and glory. A dyed flag, physically, is just a piece of cloth with chemical pigments. But in the cognitive world of sapiens, it becomes a sacred object worth shedding blood to defend. The power of shared fiction does not stop at religion or politics. It permeates the foundation of our modern economy. Consider the dollar, or any currency. In essence, a paper bill is a worthless piece of paper, inedible, useless as a weapon. But why is the grocer willing to give you a bunch of bananas, something of real biological value, in exchange for that paper? Because you, the grocer, the bank manager, and the finance minister all believe in the greatest story ever told, the story of the value of money. As long as everyone believes in that story, the system operates smoothly, far exceeding the limits of any personal relationship. The shift from trusting acquaintances to trusting symbols is the key that helped Homo sapiens dominate the planet. Neanderthals might have had larger brains, stronger muscles, but they seemed to lack the ability to create these complex fictional stories. They were stuck in small groups, while sapiens could mobilize massive corporations of warriors from strangers. In the struggle for survival, the one capable of flexible cooperation at scale is always the winner. However, looking back at the journey from tiny tribes to modern megacities, we realize a truth both magnificent and frightening. The entire human civilization stands on the invisible foundations of imagination. Laws, human rights, limited liability companies, nations, all are entities that exist in our minds more than in the physical world. We have built skyscrapers from shared dreams. But what happens when those stories lose their persuasive power? What happens when Dunbar's number returns to haunt us? When we stop believing in shared myths and retreat into our small, suspicious tribes? But this time with nuclear weapons in hand instead of stone spears. That is the question history is posing to us right now, as we stand on the threshold of a volatile era where trust seems more fragile than ever. The explosion of the cognitive revolution did not merely alter the brain structure within the skull. It ignited a biological wave that swept across the entire planet with unprecedented speed and scale. About 60,000 years ago, carrying the fresh capacity for symbolic thought, Homo sapiens poured out of Africa to conquer Eurasia, advanced into the Americas about 15,000 years ago, and achieved a seemingly impossible feat 45,000 years ago, building boats to cross the ocean and set foot on Australia. This maritime journey required more than wood-carving techniques or stargazing. It forced hundreds of people to collectively believe in a promised land lying beyond the horizon, a place none of them had ever seen. That is the reality-constructing power of imagination. However, the price for this spectacular expansion was an eternal silence blanketing nature. As Paul Martin's overkill hypothesis pointed out, wherever sapiens stepped, giant beasts or megafauna went extinct. We reshaped the biosphere with our stories and our sharp tools. Looking at the modern world ablaze with lights, you might think we have escaped our ancestors' damp caves. But in reality, we are still operating a complex 21st century civilization using the brains of hunter-gatherers from 70,000 years ago. The only difference lies in the object of belief. Instead of offering sacrifices to river spirits or praying for a totem's protection, we place absolute faith in invisible algorithms, the fluctuations of the stock market, or blinking strings of numbers in the cloud. Currency, corporations, nations, or human rights all are grand shared fictions that help billions of strangers cooperate flexibly. We have not abandoned myths. We have merely complicated them to the point of forgetting they were originally products of the human mind. And now we stand at a vital evolutionary crossroads, where the tools we created are beginning to learn how to tell stories themselves. As artificial intelligence, AI, starts to gain the ability to create language, paint emotionally moving images, and weave narratives more persuasive than humans can, a chilling question arises. Are we inadvertently handing over the ultimate power, the power to construct reality, to a new non-biological species? If human history is a fierce competition between stories to win the crowd's belief, then in the next chapter of this grand epic, who will be the storyteller and who will be the believer? The answer lies within your own perception at this very moment.